Hi, I'm Shreya, and this is my video essay for the elective Women in Conflict and Peace process. The topic I've chosen is how is gender integral to nation building? Now, before getting into the actual question in hand, it's important to establish the understanding of nation building that I am moving. Now, as far as I know, state building and nation building have often been interchangeably used. However, state building refers to the construction of the state institutions for the functioning of the state, while nation building refers to the construction of a national identity, which is also for the functioning of the state. So we could easily define nation building as a process which leads to the formation of countries in which citizens feel a sufficient amount of commonality of interests, goals, and preferences so that they do not wish to separate from each other, essentially achieving homogeneity in society. And in many cases, reformation as well, which we'll see in post conflict and post colonial states. Now, getting into the question at hand. To begin with, I'd like to discuss the idea of the post colonial national identity, which Shireen Rai talks about extensively. She talks about there being this post colonial elite class, which dominated the narrative of nation building and built this vision of a dichotomous society, where there's an economic man and a political man, where the economic man is essential to the nation building and development discourse, while the political man is merely a citizen. So, what is the economic consequence of this? What seems to be a strong inclination to preserve capitalist regimes. Nationalism's economic consequences for women's lives, such that the division of labor is not simply because of their biology or culture, but is actually made visible in national development. Gendered ideologies of nationalism frame the ways in which women's labor was configured, counted, assessed, and even rewarded. So while women were used to protect the capitalist world order, it was regulated by that very system to ensure that the identity of the nation does not waver. Women are central to the construction of nationalist discourses as merely biological reproducers of members of the ethnic collective. So, as reproducers of the boundaries of ethnic and national groups, they were also central participants in the ideological reproduction of the collective conscience and as transmitters of its culture. They are also important to nationalism as signifiers of ethnic and national differences. This particular point we see also spoken about in the context of the institution of the family. So, Fink and Higgins talk about the institution of the family and how law reinforces this and in turn impacts how the family is used to define national identity. So there are two ideas that enable the institution of the family. First is access to resources of the nation state devolves through biologically and culturally gendered national boundaries, both reflecting and reinforcing the differential status of men and women in the sphere of the family. Both authors, Higgins and Pink, suggest that the use of kinship ties in an explicitly gendered way in the United States, which reinforces the concept of ethnic nationalism, casting women and especially mothers as the symbolic protesters of national identity, which we see in India as well, where we refer to India as Bharat Mata. Second, the symbolic family and sometimes the laws defining what that family may be may figure in important ways in the struggle for national identity that often takes place contemporarily and simultaneously with nation building. So the ideology of the family, particularly the gender roles associated with it, often figures in important ways in the development of national identity in both post-colonial and post-conflict states, and not just Western states like the United States. We see this in post-apartheid Africa, where the African leaders at the time weaponized this dream of the traditional African family to be used as a unifying phenomenon, especially because during their colonization, the British heavily regulated their family laws, in order to ensure that there was no opportunity for national identity formation. So when we apply this idea of family law as the architect for gendered national identities to present day India, on one side we have the Hindu Marriage Act, which is the symbolic representation of the traditional Hindu ideal family, gendered power structures and all. And on the other side, we have the Special Marriages Act, Sharia law, and more. Within the context of Hindutva, it is clear that which families would be integrated into the national identities and which would be disenfranchised, in turn implying the role of a woman which would be integrated into national identity and the women which would be disenfranchised. Now, we can discuss countries with different socio-cultural narratives. For example, Afghanistan is a great example for discussing the role of gender in a post-conflict nation-building country. The conflicts in Afghanistan had occurred due to the extreme religious conservatism and the attempts of the West to be the liberators of its people, especially the Afghan women. However, after being considered a failed state, it was observed that there was an increase in enfranchisement of women, particularly in the political processes of the nation, and most importantly, in the National Solidarity Program, quite literally organized for the rebuilding of the nation and its national identity. This widespread acceptance occurred due to the fact that after thousands of men died in the war, women became the head of the household. However, this again is problematic as this understanding of gender relations in the nuclear family still perpetuates women as the other. Simply put, Afghanistan settled for women, not accept them. Finally, we can see that women are used as symbols of tradition as well as markers of modernity at the same time. When we look at Qatar, as well as nations with similar regimes, we see competing approaches when it comes to the utilization of women for the creation and preservation of their national identity. On one side, there are secular nationalists who often present women's increased participation in public life as a form of modern progress and proof of the compatibility between modernity and Islam. And on the other side are the religious conservatives who have depicted it as a capitulation to Western cultural imperialism, which women have to be guarded against. Nevertheless, we do see that in Qatar, there is an active increase in women in the workplace alongside the persistence of religious conservatism. But this can be understood from what Shireen Rai said about the use of women to reinforce capitalist structures for the purpose of the nation, structures which perpetuate and reinforce the patriarchy. So finally, I'd like to discuss an example where we talk about masculinity and the role of masculinity in nation building. In 1923, the dictator General Primo de Rivera implemented an ambitious project to restore Spanish masculinity on becoming the dictator. I believe his efforts to be the response to both a growing instability in gender relations at the time, what had become an enduring national crisis in masculinity. A call to action as opposed to menacing passivity and national lack of virile energy. Essentially, energy to have intercourse, permeated discourses and political practices during the course of his dictatorship. A significant number of men collaborated in his project and helped to nationalize Spanish society while defending social order. So organizations like the National Militia created forums for the display of patriotic military masculinity, essentially excluding femininity from the meta-narrative of the nation. So after an examination of the above nation-building processes, it is clear that gender does in fact play an integral role in nation building, even if the function it serves differs from nation to nation. However, I observe that even this critique of nationalism and nation building is heteronormative. Perpetuating the dichotomy of the male and female only strengthens the ability of state institutions to weaponize archaic gender roles. The lens must be broadened to be inclusive of all that belong to the nation, regardless of gender.